Hello and welcome to Talking Events, the industry podcast brought to you by Event Industry News. Today being recorded from the Victory Services Club, just opposite Hyde Park, really, right at the end of Oxford Street and at the top of Park Lane. A wonderful facility. Look them up, www.vsc.co.uk is their website. And a big thank you to the hospitality, the events and the marketing team at the venue for hosting us today. On with today's episode, and we welcome to Talking Events Tim Groot. Tim is the co-founder and CEO of Grip. Tim, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're going to be talking today about artificial intelligence, about the service and the product that you provide through Grip,
Yep.
And its application within the event industry and how it integrates with event tech. Let's talk a little bit first of all about the company. Tell us what Grip do and the services that it supplies.
Yeah, sure. So we launched Grip in April 2015 and really saw that there was a need for a smarter way to connect people at events, and that's why we built the first artificial intelligence powered matchmaking engine that is now being used by very large events such as Cannes Lions, World Economic Forum, Reed exhibition shows have used us. So we have a wide range of trade shows, conferences, forums that are using our technology to connect their attendees in a more efficient and effective way.
And is that technology deployed via your own app platforms or web platforms? How does it actually work in terms of people accessing it?
So there is various ways that people can access it. We have our own Grip app, we do branded apps, and we actually only last month launched our API, which means that event app providers, but also websites such as learning and development platforms or completely different industries, so the recruitment industry, can actually connect into our matchmaking engine and use it as an API side service. So that means that, for example, ITM Mobile, an event app provider from the States, can simply have an extra feature in their app where smart, intelligent matchmaking is available from directly from our API.
And let's perhaps put it in I suppose simple terms for people listening to this who have heard the term artificial intelligence, and the term itself has been around for a long time,
Yeah.
but really I suppose it's perhaps only in the last few years that we've reached a point in technology where we have the ability to really deploy artificial intelligence in some sense.
Yeah.
When we say artificial intelligence, what is the Grip service actually doing?
Yeah. So it's a very interesting question. I get asked this quite a bit of what is AI and how do you use it? But I think for us, AI is that it takes sensory inputs. So for example, data is an input mechanism. And then instead of just displaying it on a dashboard or whatever kind of analytics we talk about nowadays, artificial intelligence is about the component of reasoning. So it takes data as an input and is able to reason and form actions based on that reasoning. So it does it itself, and that's exactly what we do. So we take people's networking behavior, as in within the app, and take their social profile, and based on that, our system reasons what it thinks is going to be the user's networking intent and what it wants to achieve at an event, and that's what we use to recommend the right people. And so whenever a user takes a next action, so whenever it swipes someone or whatever, it sends a message to someone, we take that information and our system reasons upon that and recommends the correct next person based on that feedback.
Now, presumably then, the system is only as good as the information that it's fed, i.e. the quality of the data and the amount of information that's going into it will provide better results ultimately. So is it important that any event organisers listening to this podcast today and exploring the idea of AI and what a service like this could do for them to improve the engagement and the interactivity amongst the delegates, is it important that they're still driving the content and getting people to interact with all the various elements of their event rather than just relying on something like this to do the work for them?
So well, of course, I think that networking overall is an experience, and we are part of that experience. So I think that like an event is an experience, and we are kind of a part of that makes the overall experience better. But so if you think about the data that we use in that respect, we only take the information that is available through the event app. So let's say an organizer has an event app, uses our feature for the networking component, then we only take the data that comes through that specific feature. So we don't take the data from the rest of the event. That's all we need. It's kind of like there's a power law in terms of how much data you need, and of course what kind of improvements. If you wanted to predict earthquakes, well, you could take like 100 years of data, or you could take 200 years, but there is kind of like a point where the improvements are only marginal. I think that with a LinkedIn login and some basic data, we have enough in order to start facilitating connections.
There are an awful lot of app providers for events now in the marketplace, and it's a fiercely competitive marketplace. You mentioned that you launched the API that will allow the grip service to be integrated into other platforms. Is that really where you see the sort of the big development happening for the company, and being able to expand yourselves into lots of different marketplaces by working with other organizations?
Yes, yeah, we definitely look at event app providers as partners. So we've partnered with several of them and are always looking for more. But I think that on the one hand, it's a very competitive market. But I think what is also the case is that every event app provider tries to focus on a specific type of market. For example, Looped and Attendees, to US-based event app provider that we work with a lot of corporates, whereas Gumeo, a French provider, is working with a lot of trade shows. ITO Mobile does a lot of associations and conferences. So every event app provider kind of has its own best use case, and that's kind of how we look at it as well. It's like, I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all, and that's why we're happy to partner with as many as possible, really.
What's the incentive for them to use the Grip AI platform and integrate it with their own apps compared to actually going out and maybe developing their own? How complicated is this? It may sound like a bit of a stupid question, but for people who don't understand the complications involved with AI, how long was the process to bring Grip to market?
So we've been working on this for 1.5 years with a team of everybody except for me, and the team has a degree related to artificial intelligence, and that's like 5 engineers. So there is a big team that is working on this for a very long time. They have a lot of experience in using several of those technologies. So it's very, very complicated to design a system that can take this input level and actually do something useful with it. And I think that's also one of the reasons that we see this being a natural fit, because an individual event app provider simply does not have the power to be able to learn fast enough and actually design the correct experience.
How much information and input was sourced from event professionals themselves? How much was sourced from event app providers whilst the development of Grip was ongoing? Because presumably you needed to take some direction as to what sort of service you would ultimately be providing to the market.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good point. So it actually comes a lot from our own experience that Brent Hopelman, the founder of lastminute.com and Founders Forum, a very well-known kind of like the World Economic Forum for the tech scene, it's been called. And that's based on his experience there and my experience in going to event. We realized, all right, there needs to be a better way for people to network. But we actively work now with event organizers from Reed Exhibitions, UBM, and many of the big providers to make sure that we take our company in the right direction and make sure that the matchmaking engine matches people on the right parameters.
How adaptable is it from event to event? You've already alluded to the fact that the app providers themselves work in certain sectors and have strengths in certain areas, and that only serves to highlight further the fact that every event is completely different. So events will want different things, and they will want their delegates and their visitors to interact in different ways. How adaptable is the Grip service when it's either being used via your own app or even via as an API into somebody else's?
So the interesting thing is that actually we call people on our system are called things, because we look at it at such a broad perspective that we're not necessarily only meaning attendees and exhibitors, but it could also be books or companies or candidates for a job post, or like there is so many different ways that we could be matching with the system that we're building. The important thing is that we're building a matchmaking engine rather than a recommendation engine. So we don't necessarily look at similarities between you and other people. So when you look at Amazon and you look at another book, then there is like recommended books that are similar to the ones that you're initially looking at. That's not always the case that matching works in an event context, because I have very different goal, and I don't want to meet the people that are similar to me, but most of the time the people that are actually the opposite of me. If I'm an exhibitor at a advertising technology event, then I want to meet big corporates that could be my potential clients. I don't want to meet other like partners, preferably.
Sure,
I want
yeah.
to meet clients. So I think that's a very big difference between a recommendation engine and a matchmaking engine, and it's really where our strength lies. It's very, very generic as a layer, and it mainly takes the networking intent to figure that out. So it tries to figure out what is the intent and how can the agent make sure it recommends people that satisfy that specific intent of the user.
I'm keen to talk a little bit about the data integrity side of things and making sure that people are almost put at ease, because most of us now will be familiar and comfortable with the concept of our data being used and our habits being analysed, so to speak. So when we're on the internet, everybody's been there where you get the adverts pop up on Google, and it relates to previous searches that you've done or recommends, as you said, certain products, certain services we might be interested in. But from an integrity point of view, how do we protect the personal information that's being used to make these recommendations via the GRIP service?
So I think that for us, data integrity is very, very important, and also data protection, which is kind of two separate things. And I think on data protection, which is about making sure that people's information is securely stored, is that our system is very secure from the get-go. It's used by the UK government as well, and they have quite a strict process. We're talking to some banks as well, very strict as well in what kind of data protection is needed in order to work with them. So that's very secure for us. But also, I think on the data integrity side is also making sure that everything is stored appropriately, which is especially an issue for big organizers that have multiple events. Is that, well, one app provider might use first name and last name, and the other one might just have name. And there is so many things like that, that data gets into very different formatted and becomes quite corrupt, and that makes it more difficult to any form of analytics afterwards. So we look a lot at how we can make sure that the integrity layer is improved, as I think that will be a key component moving forward for the event industry.
And how is the data being shared? Because post-event, organisers will want to get their hands on the data to see how people have behaved. The app providers themselves will want to have a look at the data to see how they performed. How is that data being shared, and are we moving any closer to a standardized way of sharing that, where everybody is going to agree on a format that works and how it can be transferred from place to place?
So we're actually going to be launching a public API quite soon. I don't know exactly when this is going to be published, but it's going to be interesting because we're going to be launching an API that is free for registration providers to integrate with, and makes us kind of like a central place where all providers can tap into to have this common data source that provides an integral layer for everybody to integrate with. And I think that on the data protection side, it's very important that when we don't share like messaging and things like that, that's private, what people talk about. The main things that we look at and share with, for example, the event organizer, is the networking intent and how well that was satisfied. Let's say I'm going to a conference, I'm looking to meet investors in the venture capital industry here in London, and then they can see, all right, Tim had 100% intent of trying to meet with those people, but only resulted in talking to 2 of them. Well, what could the event do, and how could we make sure that I have a better experience by looking at, well, how can we make sure that people like Tim actually meet more of the people that fit his intent? So I think that's the main way that we look at it. How can event organizers improve their event and make sure that everybody has a better networking experience?
Do you support the analysing of that, or how detailed do you support the analytics side of things post-event? Because there is so much data flying around now and so much information that event organisers could and have been just so snowed under with so much information and data, they don't really know how to break it down and actually understand how it can impact on future events.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly comes to my point of saying it is this reasoning layer that an AI provides, is that rather than just presenting it to you, it should be about the system itself improving based on the data that becomes available to it. And I think that's really what we see as an exciting development, is the more inputs we can have, the better the system will become and the better your event will become because of that. On the side of us providing insights to the organizer, we're currently just looking at it at an aggregate level. So just saying, well, the group of people that work in startups or work in event technology and are interested in meeting events organizers had a score of 80% in terms of how successful they were at meeting event organizers. Here are some ways to improve it. So I think that's for us, that we try to provide not just statistics, but we really provide an insight layer and then also actions that could be taken by the organizer. And that all comes from our engine.
On a ground level perspective, how would a visitor or a delegate actually engage and utilize the artificial intelligence within the GRIP process? Again, either through your own app or through a third-party provider.
Yeah, so it's very, very simple. You go into either the event app or our own apps, and you simply log in with Facebook or LinkedIn, and afterwards we join you to the event. And then you're simply capable of starting swiping through other people that are recommended to you. So you'll get a user presented to you, and you can either swipe interested if you would like to meet that person, or skip if you would not be interested in meeting that person. A connection will only be established if the other person also swipes interested on you. So all swipes that you make are anonymous. It's kind of like the Tinder style networking experience. And we see that works really, really well in making sure that the connections that we establish are extremely valuable and both parties are actually interested in meeting. So it's very quickly to be able to go through quite a couple of profiles. For example, at Cannes Lion, we saw that more than 300 profiles were viewed on average by every attendee, which is a huge number on average across all people. So it's very interesting to see how much engagement there is in this way and how many connections we're capable of establishing, which was 8.2 per attendee at Cannes.
When somebody actually wants to make a connection, so you have two, let's call them delegates at a conference. We'll take that as a scenario. When they've established that they have commonality and I think actually it would be really good to speak to that person, is there any level of sort of beacon technology from a navigation point of view to actually be able to establish where that person is? How is the contact made? And if you're in a really, really large exhibition venue, how would you actually find that connection physically?
So in the GRIP apps, we have something called Newware, which is a peer-to-peer Bluetooth low energy solution that enables you to see which one of the connections that you've made, so it's only for the connection that you've made, which one of those is nearby. And that relies on the Bluetooth chip that is actually in your phone, so no physical or hardware beacons are required for that. But I think that, for example, Eventbase is a good example of someone that uses a lot of beacon technology as well as ITM Mobile. And they are responsible for that part. So they are looking at indoor navigation and indoor mapping, right? Yeah. So they would be able to show you, well, the connections you've made, this is where those people are. That's something that we leave up to the event app provider where they can differentiate themselves again. We just establish the connection between those two people, and currently we just set up a chat, so people can just message each other and say, well, I'm over here, you want to come up and meet. We also see that the app is used much more before and also after the event, so we see that by using GRIP, attendees get involved earlier in the event because they already want to start networking, as well as they stay engaged longer. So we have some very strong proof points to support that, that people already have several connections made before the event has even started.
How active are your clients that you've worked with so far in promoting the idea of this artificial intelligence being used to help them make good contacts at events? Because presumably the better they are at telling people what experience they could have, the higher amount of downloads they're going to get of the actual event app. I suppose what I'm asking is, has the service had a positive impact on engagement with the actual event apps, and have they done that by promoting it in advance of the events?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. We, first of all, 55% of all people that use technology say in after-event surveys that they've made a connection that they would not have made otherwise, which is a very, very high percentage of people. On your point of adoption, is that when we've been deployed as a networking feature, we can see that, for example, at Cannes Lion, that people open the app 32 times on average, which is extremely high. And so we see a lot of potential by combining the networking functionality that we have with the great adoption that existing event apps have. So some event apps, I think that the industry benchmark now goes above 60%. I think the average is somewhere between 40 and 60. Conferences is significantly higher than trade shows. It depends a lot, of course, on the event and how the event organizer promotes it. But I think that event app providers have a great information on that and how to do that better. We're simply going to be an added feature that is resulting in even more engagement inside the app before, during, and after the event.
Is the system very much geared on a peer-to-peer basis, in the sense that this is about getting one delegate to interact and meet with another delegate, or does it have any sort of application whereby visitors to a trade show could actually source suppliers or exhibitors within that particular trade show, and vice versa? Could exhibitors actually use the system to source visitors to the event that they may wish to target?
I think it's a great question again. I think that currently we've mainly focused on the pay-to-pay level, but we're going to be introducing something called categories for 4 years from now, which is not 4 years from now, but it's an event that is part of Mobile World Congress with about 10,000 attendees. So it's a really big event, and they have categories for everybody there. So they have sponsors and startups, investors, and all other forms. I think it's like 10 categories in total. So similar to a trade show where you have exhibitors and delegates. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have everybody's category, and then we're going to put that into the matchmaking engine, and we're going to see on like an extra dimension, basically, where we see, right, which categories are interested in each other. The next step for us is making sure that the event organizer is capable of tweaking that to start out with, to improve the algorithms on the beginning. So saying, well, we are seeing that there is a high tendency for exhibitors to be interested in delegates. And so, okay, then we'll take that into consideration, and we'll make sure that we present a lot more delegates to exhibitors than we would present other parties. And so that's how we can kind of skew the matchmaking engine to start with. I think we don't want to do that too much because it would impact the learning capabilities and the kind of the way to personalize the experience for the individual attendee, but it can improve the matchmaking engine on a like for specific use cases.
Is that something that you anticipate will be slow in terms of how it's adopted by users? Because there is still this hesitancy in the exhibition industry amongst visitors. There seems to be sort of this strange dynamic where people go to visit a trade show but yet don't like being sold to, if you follow me. So they'll walk around, and if somebody steps out into the aisle to hand them some information or try to speak to them, they run away from them really quickly or dodge out the way. Do you anticipate there being any sort of hesitancy at all when you try to present the service as something that suppliers and buyers could potentially use to meet each other?
I think the key thing here is that, well, again, I'm going to come back to the dating example, where we see that in the same way with dating, of course, and Tinder has completely, and other dating apps have completely revolutionized that. And that is the same thing that I think is going to happen here. I think actually it's going to be way more comfortable for a visitor to be able to go onto a platform where they can anonymously swipe interest on the exhibitors they would like to meet, and vice versa. So I think it's going to be much more interesting and much more personalized for all parties involved. And I think it will result in a much better experience at the trade show floor, because an exhibitor probably already has more meetings lined up already. They know that they have great visibility online on the digital component of the trade show, and that will improve the overall experience. So I think that there won't be any hesitance to adopt it. It's just about probably educating the attendee of how this actually works, and make sure that the anonymous part of it is clear to them.
And in some respects, it strikes me as something that actually provides better quality contact data when it comes to the sales process between, as I said, supplier and buyer in that dynamic, because a lot of companies and suppliers listening to this who have been to any form of trade show in the past will know that it's actually quite easy nowadays to capture data. You know, you can have a barcode scanner and just scan everybody's badge, and great. So you walk away from the exhibition after 3 days and you have 500 people that you've scanned, but maybe only 20 of them are going to actually be seriously interested in your product.
Yep.
You know, so scanning the data and getting it is okay in one respect, but if most of those people are not really interested, then there's no point. Now with this going back to this, both parties have to be interested in one another in order for the information to be shared. So it strikes me as something that's actually producing perhaps better quality contacts ultimately.
Exactly. We focus a lot on quality as opposed to quantity when it comes to the amount of connections that we establish. And I also think that it's a key component for us to make sure that we get faster and faster at establishing those connections. I think that technology should provide a way to make sure that people meet more and better face to face rather than having people look at their phones only. So it's about establishing those connections faster and in a more efficient way so people can actually have better conversations at the event.
Going back to the integration aspect of it, when a third-party app provider wants to use the API to integrate with their own, is that a permanent deal once it's happened? Does it get licensed on an event-by-event basis? Or is it, once an app provider has said, look, we would like to integrate the grip service within our own app, is that it deal done and they can use it then for the rest of their existence?
So currently it's on an event-by-event basis. We'll most likely move to a kind of like a usage-based API form, and that's already the deals that we're doing now with some, like for example, the UK government and SmartUp, this learning and development platform that we work with for corporate knowledge sharing, because you have explicit and tacit knowledge. So tacit knowledge is what is in people's mind within big corporates, and in order to actually connect people with each other, that's what you need people to sit down face to face and talk about that. So we're going to facilitate those connections as well. Same thing here is that currently it's on an event by event basis. Potentially it's just going to be a per user per month on how much the event provider uses our API.
How much deeper could we go with this? I mean, are we just scratching the surface of what AI can do in this particular context? Is it really a case of people becoming more involved in how much information they're sharing during an event in order for the system to actually work and provide even better, more sophisticated and better quality matchups? What are the plans for the future, and where could this be taken?
I don't think that necessarily more data sharing is needed in order to provide even better experiences with AI. I think that it's more about the system becoming more advanced and the right dynamics being in place. But I think what we could take it, what I see 3 years from now, I want to see a point where I go to an event and a system recommends me that these are the 10 people I should meet. The meetings have been set up, the timings have been arranged. Then it says there is 5 sessions that I should attend, and this is all one system that simply recommends that to me. I think that's kind of what I see as the future. A very simple interface that is, instead of being about recommendation engines and us, a system pushing information towards us. So we've gone from a pool where we type something into Google, we do a Google search. Instead now we look at feeds all the time. We look at our Twitter feed, we look at our Facebook feed, we look at our Instagram feed, and all those feeds are pushing information towards us. The next step with chatbots and anticipatory computing is that systems are going to be capable of anticipating what we want to do next. Going to say, well, when I leave here, it's going to recommend me that I get a sandwich and where I should get that sandwich because it knows what I like. And so that's, I think, the level of what I see happening in 3 to 5 years.
Geographically, which areas are you working in? It sounds as if you've got representation and have worked with clients on a global level. I'm curious to find out whereabouts you've worked with clients and which particular sectors or geographical locations may have been quick to adopt this and which ones have been slower. I'm always curious to know who is sort of pushing who and which parts of the world are really sort of driving technology like this.
I think it depends a lot on the event. I'm sometimes really amazed. For example, World Economic Forum got in touch with us and I'm like, wow, really? And so we were the only outside technology provider of the World Economic Forum in 2015. It's very interesting to see that sometimes it comes from someone that you least expect. So I think that what we currently see is that we have a lot of tech events with a lot of media and creative events that are using our technology from Europe and the States. We've also done events in Chile, we've done events in Brazil, we've done, there's a lot of places where our technology is being used.
And when you look at how you're going to continue to market this as a service, are there any other events this year that you're going to be involved in, that you're going to be making announcements about new developments or showcasing the product?
Yeah, we've quite a couple of events actually. We have there's quite at Exchanger is a very very good client of us that we've worked with several events now. That has another one coming up soon. Then we have Mapic, which is a read show in Cannes that we're working with together with Gumeo. Then we have quite a lot of shows, several others in the coming months.
I'm curious to ask whether or not you've been able to determine and analyse the actual monetary value of business that's been done as a result of using the Grip platform. Have you been able to establish that in any way?
We're trying to get there, but I can't accurately say how much value we've generated. It's very, very difficult to say. It's like for some trade shows it's easier because the value is monetary at the show itself.
Yeah.
But for conferences, most of the time those connections might become relevant 2 years later.
Yeah.
And so I think, for example, at Slush, a big tech event in Helsinki last year, I met someone that is now a very good friend of mine here in London. And so we hang out weekly. And so I would not have met that person if it wasn't for our app. And so I think there is no monetary value that I can put on that, but it made my event experience a lot better and worth it for me to go there again this year. So I think that those are also the kind of connections that you sometimes have to look at. It's very difficult to put a monetary value on all connections that are established at an event. And
ultimately, a lot of event organisers will say that their ultimate aim is to give the best possible experience to their visitors or delegates, and there is no value that you can put on that if somebody walks away from your event with a fantastic experience. We're going to wrap up today's episode right on time. Let's give our thanks first of all to Tim Groot from Grip. Tim, thanks for coming in and talking to us today.
Thank you very much.
Fascinating subject. If people want to find out more about Grip, where can they go? How can they find you?
www.grip.events. That's our website.
Easy to find them. For now, we're going to wrap up today's episode of Talking Events. Been discussing the subject of artificial intelligence, as I said, with Tim Groot, co-founder and CEO from Grip. Thanks for joining us again. You've been listening to Talking Events. My name's James Dixon.